It started on a calm summer morning when I was sitting on my dock sipping coffee and watching the lake shimmer under the rising sun. This place had been my sanctuary for years, a quiet retreat away from the noise of the city and the endless rules of homeowners associations. At least that was what I thought until Karen moved in 2 houses down. She was the new HOA president, a self-appointed enforcer of order and perfection, someone who believed her clipboard and printed rules gave her the authority to control the entire neighborhood. The first time I met her, she strutted over in her wide-brimmed hat and oversized sunglasses, holding a folder thicker than a law book. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made you feel like you had already done something wrong. "You must be Mike," she said. "I just wanted to introduce myself and talk about the dock situation." I raised an eyebrow. "The dock situation?" "Yes," she said, tapping her folder. "It seems the HOA has designated all waterfront access points as shared community property, so technically your dock belongs to everyone around the lake." I nearly choked on my coffee. "I built that dock myself, Karen. It is on my deed," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. She frowned, flipping through her papers like she was searching for divine proof. "You may think that, but if you read the HOA amendment from 2018, you will see that shared access is implied for all residents in the community." I had been warned by my neighbor Tom that Karen liked to invent rules when the real ones didn't go her way. So I smiled and said, "Sure, Karen, I will look into it." The next morning, I woke up to the sound of voices outside. Karen had gathered a small group of residents at the edge of my property. She was giving them a speech about community rights and fairness while pointing at my dock like it was the forbidden treasure of the neighborhood. I walked down the slope toward them, coffee in hand, and asked if I could help them with something. Karen crossed her arms. "You can start by unlocking that gate, Mike. We'll be using the dock today for our morning yoga group. It is community property after all." I laughed softly. "Karen, that dock is on my land. It is private property." Her face tightened. She wasn't used to people saying no. "We will see about that," she snapped, pulling out her phone and walking off. That was my first clue that she was about to make things complicated. By the next week, I had 3 letters taped to my front door, all from the HOA, demanding that I remove my dock gate and allow shared access to the water. Each letter was more aggressive than the last. Tom chuckled when I showed them to him. He said Karen once tried to fine him for having his garden hose visible from the street. It was time to handle things properly, so I called my lawyer, Andrew. Andrew was calm, experienced, and loved nothing more than putting arrogant HOA presidents in their place. He reviewed my deed and the HOA's own bylaws, then looked up with a smirk. "Mike, she doesn't have a leg to stand on. The HOA has no jurisdiction over your property line. The dock is legally yours down to 10 feet into the water." "Perfect," I said. "Let's make sure she knows that." A week later, Karen showed up, again clipboard in hand, wearing her usual superiority, like armor. I saw her from my porch and called Andrew, who happened to be visiting that morning. He followed me down to the dock, calm and confident in his tailored suit, while Karen marched toward us, already talking. "Mr. Anderson, this is your final warning," she said dramatically. "Either remove that gate and allow access, or we will be forced to issue fines and possibly legal action." Andrew smiled politely before I could even speak. "Mrs. Karen," he said in his measured professional tone, "as Mike's legal representative, I advise you to stop right there." She blinked, confused, and frowned. "I beg your pardon." Andrew opened a folder and showed her the property map, the deed, and the HOA charter, highlighting every section that proved the dock belonged entirely to me. "This land and the dock upon it are privately owned, not under HOA jurisdiction. Any attempt to access it or penalize the owner would constitute trespassing and harassment under state law." Karen's confident smirk disappeared. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She stood frozen as the papers fluttered in the breeze, her sunglasses slipping slightly down her nose. Andrew continued smoothly, "I would also recommend that you and the association cease all contact regarding this matter before my client considers filing a complaint of his own." Karen's face turned pale. Her clipboard trembled in her hands. She looked like she had just realized the HOA's power didn't extend as far as she believed. Without a word, she turned around and walked quickly up the slope, muttering something about misunderstanding the documents. Tom, who had been watching from his porch, shouted, "You gonna add that to your next meeting agenda, Karen?" She didn't answer, just disappeared behind her gate and slammed it shut. Andrew smiled and patted my shoulder. "That should keep her off your dock for good," he said. But I had a feeling this wasn't over. Karen didn't like losing, and people like her always found a new way to stir trouble. And sure enough, just a few days later, something strange happened on the lake that made me realize Karen wasn't ready to give up yet. It was late afternoon when I noticed movement by the shoreline near the edge of my property. At first I thought it was just a couple of ducks gliding by, but then I saw Karen crouched beside the water, holding a tape measure and a clipboard again. She was measuring the boundary posts like a detective solving some grand mystery. Tom saw her too, and called out from his yard, "Karen, what are you doing this time, planning to drain the lake now?" She didn't answer. She was too busy muttering to herself and writing something down. I walked closer, staying calm as usual. "Afternoon, Karen, doing some research?" I asked. She straightened up, brushing dirt off her pants, and gave me that fake smile again. "Just confirming property lines," she said. "The HOA board believes your dock might extend a few inches into the shared easement of the lake." I sighed. "Karen, we already went through this. You saw the legal documents. You know exactly where my property ends." She crossed her arms smugly. "Some of the board members are not convinced, and we might request a county review." I leaned on the fence post and smiled. "If you want to waste the county inspector's time, go ahead, but make sure you call them yourself, because I am not moving a thing." She frowned, clearly not getting the reaction she wanted. Then she turned sharply and stormed off, mumbling about bylaws and authority. That evening I sat on my porch thinking she would calm down eventually, but with Karen, calm was never part of her vocabulary. 2 days later, I received another envelope on my door stamped with HOA letterhead, and in bold letters it read, "Violation notice pending property inspection." Tom came over when he saw me reading it. "She really doesn't quit, does she?" "No, she doesn't," I said, shaking my head, "but this time she might be walking into something she can't handle." Andrew had already filed a formal notice of harassment with the local HOA oversight committee, and if Karen kept pushing, they would be forced to investigate her conduct. Still, I wanted to see how far she would go, so I waited. The next morning, I saw a white truck pulling up near my driveway, the county inspector's logo printed on the side. Karen was standing there, hands on her hips, clearly proud of herself. She waved at the man as he got out and pointed toward my dock. I could hear her from the porch. She said, "I believe his dock is illegally extended into shared lake space." The inspector adjusted his hat and looked at me. "Sir, my name is Martin. I am just here to check property lines as requested." "No problem, Martin," I said. "Come on down. I have the documents ready for you." Andrew had left me a copy of every relevant deed map and legal note. As I handed them over, Martin's eyebrows rose a bit. "You are the one who got the private ownership grandfather clause from before the HOA formed?" "Exactly," I said. He nodded, flipping through the pages. "Well, that explains everything." He walked down to the dock, measured the posts twice, then turned back to Karen. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "this dock is entirely within private property boundaries. It is not shared space, and it has been legally registered with the county since before the HOA existed." Karen froze, her lips parted slightly, like she couldn't process what she just heard. "That cannot be right," she stammered. "The HOA has authority over the entire shoreline." Martin shook his head politely. "I am afraid not, ma'am. The county has jurisdiction over the lake property, and this specific parcel is privately owned according to the deed." He signed a paper, handed me a copy, and said, "Well, everything checks out. Have a nice day." Then he climbed back into his truck and drove off, leaving Karen standing there, pale and silent. Tom, who had been leaning on his porch railing, laughed so hard he almost dropped his coffee. Karen turned toward me, but for once she didn't have anything to say. She just gave me a cold look and walked away slowly, clutching her clipboard like it was a shield. That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, I sat on the dock again, listening to the soft sound of the water hitting the posts. I thought maybe this was finally over. But the next morning I found a strange notice on my mailbox, not from the HOA this time, but from a local zoning committee. It said, "Pending review of shoreline structure compliance, based on anonymous complaint." And I knew immediately who that anonymous person was. I took the notice inside and read it twice, trying to hold back a laugh. Karen just did not know when to stop. I called Andrew and told him what happened. He sighed through the phone, sounding more amused than angry. "She is getting desperate now," he said calmly. "Send me a copy of that notice, and I will take care of it before they even show up." I scanned the paper and sent it to him within minutes. He called back, his voice firm but steady. "I just spoke with the zoning office. They said the complaint was filed anonymously, but it matches the handwriting from the previous HOA submission. It is clearly her. I could hear papers shuffling on his desk while he continued. This is starting to border on harassment. We might have to bring this up to the county mediation board. Good, I said. It is about time someone told her that she cannot run this neighborhood like a kingdom. Later that evening, Tom came over with 2 cups of coffee. He sat beside me on the dock watching the sky turn orange and gold over the lake. You know, he said quietly, I used to think Karen was just annoying, but now she is turning into a full-time problem. I nodded, taking a slow sip. She wants control, not community. That is the difference. Tom chuckled, shaking his head. Remember when she complained about my garden gnomes being too cheerful? I laughed. Yes, she called them a distraction from the neighborhood aesthetic. The 2 of us sat there until the stars came out, the soft ripples of the lake reflecting the moonlight, everything peaceful, at least for the moment. The next morning, Andrew drove down from the city. He said he wanted to handle the situation personally this time. He wore a neat gray suit, even out here by the lake, and carried a folder thick with documents. When Karen saw him step out of his car, she was already outside pruning her bushes and pretending not to stare. Andrew looked at me and smiled. Time to end this circus once and for all. He walked straight up to her yard, polite but firm. Good morning, Ms. Karen. I am Andrew, legal counsel for Mr. Harris. I would like to clarify some matters about his property. Karen froze mid-snip, her eyes flicking from his suit to his briefcase. I am always happy to cooperate with the law, she said with forced politeness, but the HOA has clear authority over all properties within the subdivision, including lake access. Andrew smiled calmly. That is where you are mistaken, Miss Karen. He opened the folder and pulled out several papers. These are the original deeds from before the HOA existed. This property was established as part of the private lakeside parcel, meaning the HOA never had jurisdiction over it. She blinked, trying to process his words. Andrew continued, and as for the repeated anonymous complaints to county offices, those have been traced back to your name since the forms were digitally submitted using the HOA account credentials you manage. Karen's face went pale. She stumbled back a step, clearly realizing how serious that sounded. Andrew lowered his voice slightly. Any further attempt to file false complaints or harass my client will be documented as an abuse of authority under HOA Code Section 12 and may result in removal from the board. Tom, who had wandered over to watch the scene, nearly burst out laughing, but I gave him a look to stay quiet. Karen stood there silent, her eyes darting between us and the papers in Andrew's hand, her confidence gone completely. Andrew closed the folder and smiled. I suggest we let this matter rest, Ms. Karen. Good day. He turned and walked back toward my house, his shoes crunching softly on the gravel, while Karen remained frozen by her bushes, her garden shears still hanging loosely in her hand. That evening, as I watched the sunset over the lake, everything felt different. The water calmer, the air lighter, the silence peaceful. But deep down, I knew Karen was not the kind of person to walk away quietly, even after being cornered by the law. For a few days, things were quiet, almost too quiet. Karen kept to herself. She stopped walking her dog past my dock, and the usual HOA notices stopped appearing in everyone's mailboxes. It felt strange to have peace after weeks of nonsense. Tom joked that maybe she had finally decided to retire from neighborhood drama. But I knew Karen better than that. When a person like her goes silent, it only means they are planning something bigger. One afternoon, I was fixing the railing on the dock when I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. I turned to see Karen standing a few yards away, holding a folder, her expression unreadable. I kept my tone calm. Morning, Karen, what brings you down here again? She hesitated before speaking. I came to apologize. That was not what I expected to hear. She continued slowly. I may have overstepped my authority. I only wanted to make sure the neighborhood stayed in order. I thought I was doing what was right. Her voice trembled slightly, like the words were heavier than she wanted them to be. I nodded, still cautious. I appreciate that, Karen. Everyone wants to take care of this place, but sometimes the best way to do that is to respect each other's boundaries. She gave a small nod, then looked out at the lake, her reflection rippling on the surface. It really is beautiful here, she said quietly. It was the first time I had ever heard her say something without a tone of superiority. We stood there for a moment, the sound of the water and birds filling the silence. Then she said softly, "You are lucky to have this view." "It is peaceful," I replied. "You should enjoy it too from your own yard." She gave a faint smile, the first genuine one I had seen from her, and then she turned and walked away slowly down the gravel path toward her house. I watched her go, unsure if I should trust that moment of sincerity. Later that evening, Tom stopped by and asked what that was about. She came to apologize, I said, though I am not sure what to make of it. Tom raised an eyebrow. Really? That woman knows how to apologize? Apparently, I said, still half smiling. For the next week, she stayed quiet, no letters, no complaints, no surprise inspections. It felt almost like the lake itself was resting after a long storm. Then one morning, I found an envelope in my mailbox again, but this time it was not from the HOA. It was from the county property office, addressed to both me and Karen. Inside was a notice stating that the neighborhood's property boundaries around the lake would be officially reviewed and verified as part of a historical land survey project. I called Andrew immediately and told him about it. He sounded amused. This is routine, he said, but it means the county will confirm everything we have been saying, which is good news for you. And for Karen, I asked. He chuckled. Depends on how she takes it. The survey team arrived 3 days later. They brought equipment, maps, and old property ledgers dating back decades. Karen stood on her porch watching as they worked, her face tense but quiet. When the lead surveyor finally walked over to speak to both of us, he pointed at the updated map and said, "Clearly this confirms that Mr. Harris's dock is entirely on private land and always has been. It was registered long before the HOA boundaries were drawn." Karen nodded slowly, no argument, this time just quiet acceptance. The surveyor smiled. "Looks like everything here is in perfect order." As they packed up and left the neighborhood, I caught a glimpse of Karen staring out at the lake again, her expression softer, maybe thoughtful. Tom came over later and said maybe she finally learned her lesson. Maybe, I said, though part of me wondered if people like Karen ever truly changed. The lake was calm that evening, sunlight dancing across the water, and for the first time in a long while, I could sit on my dock in peace, knowing that the fight was finally starting to lose its hold. Days turned into weeks, and the calm around the lake held steady. For once, no one was arguing about mailboxes or fences or lawns. The air felt lighter, and the neighborhood looked alive again. Families came down to fish, kids played near the water, and the sound of laughter replaced the tension that had hovered there for so long. Karen kept her distance. She would wave politely sometimes from her porch, but never crossed into anyone's yard again. One afternoon, as I was sanding the edge of my dock, I heard her voice behind me. She sounded uncertain. "Mr. Harris." I turned around. She stood there holding a small envelope in her hand. "I wanted to give you this," she said, and handed it to me before I could even ask what it was. She added, "It is not a complaint, I promise." I opened it carefully. Inside was a simple thank you card, the handwriting neat, but a little shaky. It said, "Thank you for your patience. I forgot that rules are supposed to protect people, not control them." I looked up at her and saw something I never thought I would see from Karen: humility. "That means a lot, Karen," I said quietly. She gave a small nod and smiled weakly. "I am stepping down from the HOA board," she said. "It is time for someone else to take over, someone who listens better." That surprised me, but I could tell it was genuine. I wished her well, and she walked away slowly, like a person finally setting down a heavy burden she had been carrying for too long. Tom showed up later when he heard the news. "Did you hear? She actually quit the HOA," he said, laughing. "I thought the sun would burn out before that happened." I chuckled. Yeah, maybe miracles do happen. The neighborhood changed after that. Without Karen enforcing rules over every flower pot and mailbox, people started helping each other more instead of spying on one another. We had block cookouts again. Kids rode bikes freely without being told to stay off the road, and laughter filled the evenings. One evening, Karen came to the cookout, too. She stayed on the edge of the crowd, talking quietly with some of the older neighbors, and for once nobody seemed angry to see her. I watched her for a moment, then went back to flipping burgers. Tom leaned toward me and said, "Never thought I would say this, but maybe she just needed to be reminded what community really means." "Maybe we all did," I replied. As the night fell, the lake reflected the lanterns hanging from the trees, the sound of crickets mixing with laughter and music. The water rippled softly under the moonlight, and I realized how far we had come from the chaos that once consumed our little lake community. Karen sat quietly on a bench at the edge of the dock, her face calm, eyes watching the reflection of the stars on the water. For the first time, there was no tension between us, only silence, the kind that felt peaceful, not heavy. The kind that meant maybe, just maybe, things had finally changed for good. As summer began to fade into fall, the lake grew quieter. The trees turned gold and red, their reflections dancing softly across the still surface of the water. I spent most evenings on the dock sipping coffee, watching the seasons shift, and feeling grateful for the calm that had returned. One evening I saw Karen walking slowly down the path, her dog trotting beside her. She waved gently, and for the first time her smile reached her eyes. "Evening, Karen," I said. "Evening," she replied. "The air is getting cooler, isn't it?" "It is," I said, "but peaceful." She nodded and looked out over the lake for a long moment before saying softly, "You were right all along. Sometimes peace is better than being in charge." I smiled. I think we both learned that lesson the hard way. She laughed, a quiet, genuine laugh, and then started walking back toward her house, her dog's leash loose in her hand. As she disappeared into the shadows of the trees, I felt something settle inside me, a sense of finality and peace. Weeks passed, and winter rolled and the lake froze over, and snow blanketed the roofs of the cabins. The HOA held new elections that year, and the new president, a friendly man named Paul, made it his mission to restore trust and kindness among the neighbors. Karen stayed retired from the board, but she still came to the meetings, sitting in the back row and smiling whenever people spoke respectfully instead of arguing. One evening near Christmas, she left a small box on my porch. Inside was a jar of her homemade jam and a note that read, "Thank you for standing your ground. Sometimes people like me need people like you to remind us where the line is." I placed the note on my mantle and smiled to myself. The lake shimmered under the winter moon, and the world felt still and calm again. The dock stood strong, the same as it always had, a quiet reminder that peace does not come from control, it comes from understanding. And as I looked out over the frozen water, I knew that even in a place run by rules and pride, kindness had finally won its quiet victory.